Now, Labour is calling on the government to act immediately to sort out the exams fiasco in England after 280,000 pupils had their marks downgraded by an exam replacement system.
So Keir Starmer says ministers must follow the lead of Scotland and allow teacher-assessed marks to be accepted. We're joined now by the Shadow Education Secretary, Kate Green. Kate, thanks for joining us this morning on Good Morning Britain. So Keir Starmer is coming out saying that the government have got to handle this better, you know, that we've got to get kids back to school and we've got to sort this this fiasco, these exams fiasco. But there's very little detail, really. I want to get straight to the point with you, I think. What would Labour have done differently? Let's say, first of all, with the exam fiasco. What would they have done that the Conservatives haven't?
Well, we've now known this is the third week in which we've been aware of problems because, first of all, we could see what happened in Scotland then last week with A-levels. So we certainly wouldn't have been sitting around until today to sort out this fiasco. Last week around A-levels, we said exactly as you've noted, when it became clear just what the sheer scale of the problem was, that the teacher-assessed grades should be used. That's not perfect, but it would have allowed for fairer, better results and enabled students to move forward with their future studies or future careers. We also called for a technical review of the GCSE results. There was at that point still several days to go in which the government should have embarked on that technical review. To the best of my knowledge, here we are at the beginning of this week with the results for GCSEs just 3 days away, and we haven't really made any progress. Indeed, we've got more confusion because now the government, having announced how it would do appeals for A-levels, we saw literally hours later those criteria withdrawn again. Students both for GCSE and A-level results must be absolutely wondering what on earth is the situation and feeling incredibly worried and anxious. It's disgraceful.
But with teacher assessment on A-levels, if you go with that, we've seen an inflated increase of, they say, 12%. So that means universities up and down the country are going to have to accept more students. What if they don't have the capacity, both in lecture theatres and accommodation? What do you do with those students who have got the grades but then can't get a place?
Yeah, we did say that universities and colleges should be flexible to accommodate the horrors that these young people are going through no fault of their own. And of course, there are real pressures on universities to know how many students they're going to be welcoming at the beginning of the new academic year, so they can plan for lecture theatres, for teaching staff, for student accommodation and so on. At the same time, we do know that universities have capacity, or certainly had at the time that the A-level results came out, partly because, of course, the government has made it so much more difficult for international students to come to the UK. But they need to know, they need planning time. And of course, universities can't sit around waiting forever. Those places are now filling up. And so the government just needs to make it absolutely clear on what basis results are being awarded to A-level students, what grades they've got. It's got to be fair to those young people. And then universities can fill up the places that continue to exist and students can get on with their lives.
The argument against having just the teacher-assessed marks is that it isn't fair in itself. I mean, teachers predict in different ways. Some of them mark down in order to encourage students to work harder. Also, it then isn't fair for students who took their exams last year, students who'll be taking their exams next year. And the argument is that it devalues the qualification for the young person from this year, because if they're branded as the ones that got their results in 2020, oh, you're the ones that had the lenient grades because of the way that they were worked out, that's not fair either, is it?
Well, there is now no perfect system, I'm afraid. But let's not forget that these young people have already suffered incredible disruption to their education over the last 5 or 6 months because of the COVID crisis and the lockdown. And it's really important, I think, that we do go the extra mile for them to protect their futures. We've done that, or the government's done that quite rightly with its furlough scheme for workers, with extra support for certain business sectors. But it's never really put young people first. And I think it's vital that we give these young people the very best chance in life and use the teacher assessment grades this year. Of course, there is an appeals process too, because you're right, sometimes teachers will get the grade wrong. But of course, the government is really messing up that appeals process as well. It took Labour to call for the charges, the fees that you have to pay to be waived, but we still don't know the criteria. And really, this is becoming an absolute farce now, and a farce that's incredibly cruel to young people.
OK, let's talk about going back to school. This is the big topic. Parents this morning thinking, are my kids going back to school in a couple of weeks' time? Again, Keir Starmer, your leader, has talked about how this does need to happen and wrote a big piece over the weekend, but just lacking detail. I mean, it's a very difficult situation for the current government. OK, we can admit they've got mistakes over time, but what specific measures would you like to see in place to make this happen? How do you make this the safest it can be?
So schools have been working really hard all through the summer holidays to make their schools safe and welcoming for children's return. They've been looking at how to reconfigure the school day, maybe how to reconfigure their premises. They'll be putting in measures like extra cleaning and so on. They were doing that on the basis of government guidance, which they received just before the end of the summer term. It should have been out much sooner. Confused guidance, sometimes contradictory, but they've been doing their best with it. I do think the government should be putting in more support for them.
What's your detail, your specific details? Yeah. What would you do that's different?
Well, I think the crucial thing that has to be working is the testing, tracing and isolating process. It's still underperforming. At the same time, I think schools do need to know that if they need support to put particular measures in place, that will be available to them, that they will be able to get that support to perhaps take on extra staff or to find additional premises. There's no advice to them on how to do that at the moment. We're now just, 2 or 3 weeks away from the start of term. I've talked to heads and said, have you heard anything directly? Has anyone representing the government been to talk to you about this? And they're saying no. And all of this is really important because what heads and teachers really want to be doing now is being out talking to parents to reassure them that their children are going to be safe in school. It is the safest place for their children to be and so crucial for their learning and for their social and emotional well-being.
And do you think that teachers and older children should be wearing face masks? We know that Patrick Roach, the General Secretary of the NAS UWT Teachers Union, has said that when social distancing can't be adhered to, as in the wider population, masks should be worn.
Well, I've looked very carefully at the masks and other social and other safety measures that have been put in place in schools in other countries and what's happened and what the experts are saying. And there seems to be general agreement that there are a number of things that are really important. Social distancing, as you say, is one. Having well-ventilated classrooms is another. Having a very rigorous cleaning regime is a third. Where masks are being used, it doesn't seem to be with younger children at all, sometimes with older children and staff. It tends to be in countries where they've had, or areas where they've had very high infection rates. So they're certainly not a silver bullet, but I wouldn't rule them out. And I would say that schools need access to the data about infection rates and what's going on to make decisions and make plans. And they also need to know that when they need equipment like masks or other protective equipment, they'll be able to access it and they'll have the resources to pay for it. So masks may be part of the safety measures that some schools want to consider, but I certainly wouldn't say that masks are going to make all the difference. It's really important that schools are able to put the complete safety package that they're planning in place.